Deforestation of the Brazilian Amazon continued at a record high through June. The United States reported a new record number of 63,000 COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours on Friday. Demonstrations were seen in Mali's capital Bamako on Friday, demanding that President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta resign. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. This Friday, it was reported that deforestation of the Brazilian Amazon continued at a record high through June. According to Brazil's National Institute for Space Research, deforestation alerts were detected in over 1,000 square kilometers in June, marking a new record for this month since 2015. This is the second consecutive year in which deforestation is on the rise in the Amazon rainforest, coinciding with the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro, who maintains a policy in favor of illegal logging and mining activity in the region. And Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro vetoed the main sections of a bill approved by Congress that would force the government to guarantee the protection of indigenous peoples during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our correspondent Nacho Lemus brings us more details.
En la madrugada del miércoles, cuando parecía que Bolsonaro estaba descansando.
On Wednesday morning, the Brazilian government's newspaper published the president's veto of 16 items of the draft law 1142 that forces the Brazilian government to guarantee the protection of indigenous communities.
That will lead to a higher number of indigenous deaths, a higher number of positive cases. Unfortunately, the Brazilian state did not bring any sufficient or effective measures to combat the COVID-19. That's why the draft law was intended to replace that absence of the state by forcing it to act effectively to ensure the integrity of indigenous people.
According to studies by the Federal University of Pelotas, the rate of contagion among indigenous people in the urban population is 5 times higher than among non-indigenous people, while mortality per COVID-19 among indigenous people is 9.6%. For the Brazilian population in general is 5.6%. As of July 7, 12,088 indigenous had already been infected by COVID-19 and 445 died.
The destruction of indigenous health work that began with the destruction of the Mass Medical program and other federal government programs for indigenous health, it was already a genocidal practice of Bolsonaro and is deepening with the COVID-19.
Bolsonaro vetoed the obligatory quarantines for the distribution of drinking water and hygiene, hospital beds and intensive cares, ventilators and blood oxygenation machines, internet in villages, basic food baskets, and easy collections of emergency assistances from the government, taking into account reports by indigenous positive cases in lines to access assistance.
Maybe it is the draft law that suffered the most vetoes in the current administration of President Jair Bolsonaro. That draft law must be seen not only as a budgetary economic issue, but as a draft law that saves lives.
After Bolsonaro's veto, Supreme Court Minister Luis Barroso determined that the Brazilian government must take urgent measures to prevent the deaths of indigenous people from coronavirus by installing a situation room with indigenous participation and the National Council for Human Rights. The measure provides isolated or recently contacted indigenous villages and the assistance of indigenous people in demarcated lands, as well as villages without demarcation.
Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez offered an update on COVID-19 figures on Friday. The Vice President reported 390 locally transmitted COVID-19 cases and 3 deaths in the last 24 hours. Rodriguez also reported 41 imported cases, of which 36 cases came from Colombia and 5 were people who had contact with others who had returned from abroad. The Venezuelan official also called on the population to respect the lockdown measures and social distancing. Venezuela's COVID-19 figures now stand at more than 8,000 positive cases and 80 deaths. Farmers in Panama are currently on alert over the possible arrival of a Central American locust swarm. The Panamanian Ministry of Agriculture Development has begun training technical personnel to identify and implement immediate control of the migratory species of grasshopper capable of destroying crops within hours. The estimates are that the swarm could reach the territory of the border provinces of Chiriquí and Bocas de Toro from neighboring Costa Rica. The Central American locust migrates more than 150 kilometers per day, and a swarm of 80 million can eat about 100 tons of crops in a single day over an area of 1 square kilometer. Nicaraguan Vice President Rosario Murillo announced that several bands and artists of the country, led by Maestro Ruben Rodriguez, are preparing a concert to celebrate the 41st anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution. The Vice President explained that the Rubén Darío National Theatre has been recording the show, which will be broadcast on public television on July 18th, the eve of the historic date that marked the end of the Somoza dictatorship in 1979. Due to the health situation in the country, the Nicaraguan government has avoided holding large public events and is opting for virtual concerts to celebrate historic dates. Mexico has called on Canada to arrest and extradite Thomas Cerrón, the former head of investigations into the Ayotzinapa 43 disappeared student teachers. Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard announced the beginning of the process with Canada to ensure the extradition of the former head of the Criminal Investigation Agency, who is one of the officials involved in the case of the 43 student teachers who went missing in September 2014. An Interpol Red Notice was issued in March for the arrest of Thomas Cerrón, who fled the country on June 30th. He is accused of having witnessed and tolerated the torture of detainees in the investigation of the Ayotzinapa case. The latest move comes after the remains of one of the missing students was recently identified.
Now we are starting something similar in Canada with Thomas Cerrón. There will be no impunity. Part of our role in the Foreign Affairs Secretariat is to ensure that when there are cases of this nature, extradition occurs. It is something important for Mexican justice that those who have important trials in Mexico or cases in Mexico answer in Mexico for their acts.
Foreign Minister of the Dominican Republic, Miguel Vargas, announced that his country will host a virtual ministerial summit on informality and social inclusion in times of COVID-19. The summit of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development will feature Latin America and Caribbean ministers and high-level officials in the fields of labor, planning, economy and social development, and will be held from July 13th to 17th. Representatives of international and civil society organizations will also participate. The event aims to provide opportunities to identify ways to transition to formal employment and resume job creation in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. 5 acting ministers, 8 former presidents, 2 prominent economists and over 40 progressive leaders from Latin America met virtually this Friday to commemorate the first anniversary of the Puebla Group. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Argentinian President Alberto Fernández spoke on behalf of the group about the pending issues for the continent.
Dear friends, Puebla Group, I am here to celebrate with you the first year of the group. What I want is to send my regards in this very particular moment that the world and also the region is experiencing, because in this moment the hotspot of the pandemic that is attacking us in Latin America, and actually it's very hard to see what is going on, to see how some get sick and how other leaves us. In such an unequal continent that often and in many places, many citizens do not receive the medical attention they deserve. And these are the kind of things we need to talk about going forward, to build a more equal continent, a more socially balanced continent, a continent that better distributes its wealth. These are the topics we'll still have to discuss.
And we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The United States reported a new record number of 63,000 COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours on Friday. Our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Estoso, brings us the details.
In the U.S. in the last 24 hours, 63,000 cases, totaling 3,250,000 cases in the country, over 136,000 deaths. Americans are not happy the way that President Trump is handling the pandemic. According to an ABC News poll, 67% of Americans disapprove the way that President Trump is handling the COVID-19 pandemic. And President Trump has canceled a rally that he was having scheduled for tomorrow in New Hampshire, officially because of bad weather. And definitely there's a growing rift between his authorities of health and himself regarding the pandemic. More and more, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, are disagreeing with the way President Trump wants to reopen early the schools in the country. Same thing with Dr. Fauci. And this is having a very important impact in the economy. There is 50 million Americans that has been requesting benefits for unemployment. At least 20 million continue to be unemployment. And definitely that is helping the opposition. In this case, Joe Biden is criticizing very highly President Trump, that he sees the possibilities of re-election evaporating pretty quickly. We get back to you now.
Thank you, Jorge. Moving on to Italy now, where Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte announced on Friday that it's possible that the state of emergency declared in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic be extended beyond the end of July.
The state of emergency doesn't mean we are not keeping the virus under control. Beware. So any extension simply means that we are then in a position to continue to take the necessary measures, even minimal ones, so you should not be surprised if the decision is to extend the state of emergency.
Authorities imposed a second lockdown in Uzbekistan on Friday, while reporting almost 300 new coronavirus cases.
At the entry checkpoint to Tashkent, police officers are carrying out their duty. Cars from Tashkent region and other regions of the country loaded with food and agricultural products are passing through organized travel corridors. People trying to enter Tashkent without an approved reason are not allowed in and are being sent back.
People did not keep the discipline. Authorities tell them not to gather together, wear masks, but you see on the street some people wear masks and some others don't. We need to keep the discipline. If every person looks after themselves, we can look after everyone.
The young people have been roaming around, especially at night. I work at night and I see them roaming around, going to different bars when everyone should have stayed in.
People gathered outside Istanbul's emblematic Hagia Sophia on Friday as a Turkish court ruled the museum would reopen later this month as a mosque. The Turkish Council of State cancelled a 1934 cabinet decision that defined the city's 6th century Hagia Sophia into a museum. The site, which was originally a cathedral before becoming a mosque, became a symbol of secularism in modern Turkey after being made into a museum. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stressed that like all Turkish mosques, the doors of the Hagia Sophia will be wide open to locals and foreigners, Muslims and non-Muslims, following a televised address to the nation. Meanwhile, the decision was being characterized worldwide by representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Christian community and UNESCO as a bad decision, as the Hagia Sophia is a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
We take today's decision regarding the conversion of Hagia Sophia to a mosque with deep regret. The church was built in the 6th century and was devoted to Christ the Savior. For us, it has been and will always remain the church devoted to Christ. We regret sincerely that this decision has been taken now. From our point of view, this decision hinders a fragile interreligious and interconfessional balance that has been reached in the modern world. This decision hurts the Orthodox community around the world.
We have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Demonstrations were seen in Mali's capital Bamako on Friday, demanding that President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta resign. Thousands of protesters gathered outside the Malian parliament and in the courtyard of a state broadcaster, claiming that President Keita has been unable to properly handle the country's long-running jihadist conflict and economic crisis. Meanwhile, the June 5th opposition movement, led by the influential Imam Mahmoud Dicko, has called for wide-ranging political reforms, including a new parliament and the formation of a transitional government. This is the third large demonstration in 2 months in Mali amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Kenyan authorities offered an update on COVID-19 cases on Friday, while noting that they are on the rise.
Today, our numbers of those who have tested positive have continued to rise above what we recorded yesterday. Out of a sample of 6,979, nearly 7,000, a total of 473 people have tested positive to coronavirus disease just in the last 24 hours. This takes our caseload to 9,448 for the positive cases from a sample of 2,006,584.
Demonstrations were seen in Jordan's capital Amman on Friday against Israel's plans to annex occupied West Bank territories.
We say to this entity and the head of this entity that his plan is only a dream. If he's looking these days to annex part of the West Bank, we are aware of the reality of this entity, that he plans to annex the whole of Jordan and Iraq and Egypt. Therefore, we will confront this entity with all our power until this entity ends completely, until this entity gets out from the whole of Palestine, not only from the West Bank.
All the decisions will not cancel the cause. The Palestinian cause is alive in the hearts of its people, so its annexation decision is only ink on paper. Our nation may stay weak and may not be able to send a message, but it will be alive again.
Singapore's ruling People's Action Party won the general elections on Friday, securing 83 of 93 parliamentary seats. Singaporean Prime Minister and Secretary General of the party, Lee Hsien Loong, acknowledged that the result showed not only broad-based support for the PAP, but also a clear desire for more diversity in the parliament.
On the outcome of the election, the popular vote is 61.2%. We won 83 seats out of 93, and we have a clear mandate. But the percentage of the popular vote is not as high as I had hoped for. The results reflect the pain and uncertainty that Singaporeans feel in this crisis. The loss of income, the anxiety about jobs, the disruption caused by the circuit breaker and the safe distancing restrictions. This was not a feel-good election. The results show also a clear desire for a diversity of voices in Parliament. Singaporeans want the PAP to form the government, but they, and especially the younger voters, also want to see more opposition presence in Parliament.
Demonstrators have staged a sit-in near an oil production site in southeastern Tunisia. Oil production sites are common scenes of recurrent tensions with authorities in Tunisia, with protesters demanding jobs and investment. About 50 people, mostly youngsters, have been conducting a sit-in for the past 2 days near the El Kamor oil site, southwest of the capital Tunis, located in the middle of the desert. Demonstrators set up tents and blocked vehicles, demanding the implementation of an agreement reached after the clashes of 2017, which provides for the hiring of thousands of unemployed people from this marginalized region and the creation of a local investment fund.
We have been waiting for the implementation of the El Kamor agreement. The government is still in a state of hibernation. We are in El Kamor and we will go to the oil valve. We will go near the valve soon. Our objective is the valve. Let the government remain in hibernation. It must assume its responsibilities. We have to close the valve and that they don't come begging for it to be open, because this time opening the valve will not be easy.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but we finish with a video produced by African international students at Laocheng University in Shandong Province, China, titled War Against COVID-19, which offers some simple advice to help stop the spread of the virus. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website as well as on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.
In the past 2 weeks, The number of cases of COVID-19 outside China has increased 13-fold, and the number of affected countries has tripled.
Transmission worse than Ebola. Never say had I known, it's always sad. Inti uru sana fasamina ye, pena wanko fire yeah. Be cautious when you go out there. Uru sana fasamina ye, pena wanko fire the money be. Never think you are immune. Be cautious when you go out there. Let's stand together to fight the virus. Transmission worse than Ebola. Never say so is
Bon, arrêtons nos conneries. L'heure est grave, c'est pas de la comédie. Corona est dangereux, donc soyons un peu plus sérieux. 3 ans sur 2 points sur toi, nous savons que tu wash les mains. Reste en case, évite ton peuple et sauve des vies. Et sauve des vies.
Only share verified info. You may put us in a state of a limbo. Caution is the weapon. Be courageous and carry on.